Kieran Evans's Kelly and Victor is a dark masochistic love story based on the bestseller by Niall Griffith. Cine Outsider chatted with the first-time filmmaker about the intricacies of adaptation.
Death, daughter life, cheery.
What else does it say?
It's a funeral monument for this woman Eliza McLaughlin and husband Percy. They were two atheists who wanted to symbolise their love after they died. So they had this made.
Pretty amazing way of showing your love, eh?
Yeah, it is.
Well, firstly, Kieran, welcome to the London Film Festival. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being here.
Now, your film, Kelly and Victor, is based on a 2002 novel. When did you first read it, and when did you discover that you had this itch to make it into a feature film?
I met Niall Griffiths in around probably 2000. I was doing some short films at the BBC, and we kind of shared kind of our love of a Liverpool football club, and we also shared the same parentage, kind of Welsh, half Irish. So we kind of got on really well straight away. And he sent me a proof copy of his Kelly and Victor for just to check out. And I had just started working with my producer Janine Marmot, and we were kind of looking for something that kind of resonated with my upbringing and that type of. We're looking for a project that kind of fitted what I was wanted to do. So I went away on holiday and with the proof copy of Kelly and Victor, and kind of about a week later I'd read it 4 times and was completely mesmerised by the story and utterly taken with the characters, and just every page that I turned was kind of sparking images, and I just thought this must be something that's important to me, obviously. So I went back to Janine and I said, I think this might be the project we've been looking for. And so that's kind of how it started, really. And then we optioned it, and then the long journey to making it began, shall we say.
It's interesting to note in the credits that you're both down for having done the adaptation, but yet you have sole screenwriting credit.
Right.
I'm interested by this.
Well, basically what happened was that originally we were going to collaborate on the script writing and the screenplay together, and then about 6 months into the development, Niall had already started work on his novels, his 4th and 5th novel actually, and so obviously his time was a little bit more tight, but also he'd started, once we'd kind of developed the idea and the structure of the film, we then obviously started work on kind of actually writing the script, and he found whilst we were writing together he was getting bored, because these are characters that he wrote back in 2000. By this point, this must be about 2004, 2005. So there were characters that had long gone, and he'd already started thinking about, his characters for his new novel. And so his focus wasn't really on the script. And so we just agreed that I'd just carry on. I'd do the script and do the screenplay for him. So that there was a continuation. And so that's kind of how that's the explanation. There wasn't anything sort of. We didn't fall out or anything like that. It was just the way things were at the time.
The book is really heavy on narration, and it uses this device where it switches perspectives from Victor to Kelly at the midpoint, and then retells the whole story. I'm wondering if you ever entertained this idea in the adaptation.
Well, that was one of the challenges. Really, was how to do it. I mean, the book that's what I found was fascinating about the book was. He had an internal monologue really of Victor and his feelings up to a certain point, and then we rewound and we went with Kelly up to the end. And so that was a challenge, and we entertained many ways of kind of showing that structure. The actual what we kind of arrived at was a narrative structure where time kind of slightly slips out of sync, and where you don't really know where you are especially with Kelly's timeline, about what day that could be. And so we played on kind of things about, well, could it be the day of her birthday, and so or not, or could it be just a couple of days after the middle bits of the film, which I don't want to give away, obviously. But so I mean, originally I think one of the things we worked on a concept, which was the idea of telling Victor's story going forward and Kelly's story going backwards, and that kind of actually helped us in the whole script and the structure of the book, how we arrived at the final structure of the film, because it just allowed us to not worry so much about proceeding scene, or anything like that, but just focus much more on just what scenes need to do at that certain time. And that kind of freed us up to kind of really explore kind of like how we could actually, it was a bit like kind of like taking cards and shuffling them around a bit so scenes could move easily, much more easily in the edit as well. So that kind of just allowed us to be a bit more experimental and play with the narrative structure a bit more and the timeline, and allowed us to experiment a bit more then, really, which was kind of like the freeing moment when we were writing the script.
I found it interesting as well that voiceover was entirely absent. Were there early drafts where that was present?
No. I think from a very early age, from the start, we both me and Niall agreed that we were not going to fall into that trap. That we did, if we started doing that, that was almost kind of letting the book down. I mean, the book has its own, it's the internal monologue, and of course that's what you do when you get words in the book. But I think even the funders, actually, to be honest, when we started working with Film 4, they also didn't really want to have any voiceover or narration or anything like that. So it was, that was kind of part of the challenge as well, really. Well, how the hell do we do this then? So, but that's kind of that was part of the fun, really. I think it would have been too tricksy, and I think it would have just let the film down if we'd have had people's thoughts in your head all the time. So.
At one point in the book, Kelly remarks that she doesn't know where all the sex and the violence in her comes from. And I believe it was The Guardian, was one of the reviews that I'd read that criticised this because I think the sniffy response was neither do we. And I was wondering how
book?
Yeah. And I was wondering how you addressed that with Antonia, because she must have had questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing was obviously we kind of created backstory for her, just for her to kind of draw on, really, and see, and focus on where she was coming from. But I think what she pointed out, which was quite interesting, was that sometimes what's actually spinning our characters out is actually they didn't realise they could do this before, and something happens. Something it's like almost like a domino reaction or a spark or something, whatever you want to call it. It's the tipping point is when they meet, and they both, something inside both of them, an innate something happens to them. And so she was kind of saying that actually she drew on the idea that basically what half her performance should be all about kind of figuring out, why am I doing this? And she found it much richer and easier to have that to draw on, and that it was a journey to find out, what the hell am I doing? Why have I done this to him? Why am I so driven to do this to him? Because I think that's one of the things that she, in the book especially, she asks so many questions about why other people do what they do to people, especially with Victoria and the dominatrix. She's all constantly asking questions about why do people do this, and the answers are almost so banal, and they don't really kind of give you an idea of why people want to be whipped, why people want to be driven. It's just the thrill of doing it, or having the power having the power of control over somebody. And I think that's kind of the interesting thing for Kelly, was just that half. I don't think she even dreamed to do this before, but something inside Victor, or something about Victor, made her do it. And what she gets out of it is incredible. But then, once you try one thing and it tastes so nice, you just want to keep going and going and going, and there's a point where you can't take that any further.
Well, we see different forms of masochism and sadomasochism in the film, and the one scene that I can't forget is when she goes with Vicky, who you've already mentioned, the professional dominatrix, and she's disgusted by what she sees, and yet what she does with Victor in the bedroom is so much more wild and out of control.
Yeah, I mean, that's again. I mean, that's exactly it. It's about. I think that because it is somebody who's doing, who's taking pleasure out of actually being punished, and what she does isn't what her act isn't about punishment. It's about a lust. It's about something. It's about when Antonia had to do that thing that she had to do. She kind of found herself kind of trying to kind of put herself into the space of a dominatrix and thinking about it that way. And she kind of, when we were chatting about it, she just went, it's not like that. We were talking about the thrill that you get when you were a child and when you bite somebody, you know, when you were a kid and you kind of did that and all that kind of thing. And I said, it's more like that. It was like that's kind of that sense that you can commit an act of violence but take pleasure from it. And that thrill that you get from it, that little rush. And I think that's kind of what you get. And what the difference between that and Victoria and the banker and all that is that the fact that nobody's getting a rush out of it. It's almost it's a transaction between two people where Victoria just does it because that's what he wants, and he gets something because that's what he wants. But together they wouldn't want to do that to each other. There's no mutual consent going on in terms of a form of a sexual pleasure. Whereas with Kelly, she does something so violent, but she gets pleasure from it, and she can't figure out where that came from.
Well, it's a fascinating character study. I must say, brilliantly adapted.
Thank you very much.
So just before we let you go, what was your favourite scene as a fan of the book to put on screen and to realise in this medium?
Well, one of them was actually the scene with the banker. Obviously, not because this kind of resonates so much now with what's going on in the economy. But I think, for me, it was about Victor hitting nature, really. And I think that what was different about the book was obviously they go off on a kind of like another bender, whereas I was kind of much more kind of wanted to kind of draw this whole thing about, draw the idea of how nature and cruelty go hand in hand. The way we live and the way everything around us is all about nature is cruel, really. Life isn't cruel, nature is cruel. And these things of beauty that surround us are amazing things, but a lot of them are all about peril. So the film, for example, starts and ends with birdsong. Now that's obviously a thing of beauty on one level because of the sound, but actually what you're hearing are birds crying out to say that people know that they're still alive. And I thought that, coupled with Victor hitting nature and being out in Wales, was a kind of for me was the point where I realised that was actually one of the final scenes we shot. That was that day of shooting with Victor and Julian out in the nature, out by the lake, was a day where it all really started coming together because it just seemed to kind of connect up all the elements that I wanted to kind of put across when we were shooting in Liverpool.